Hello, my bookish friends. Welcome back. I am Elizabeth. This is Reading Riley, and today I'm going to tell you about all of the books that I read in September. In total, I read 10 books, which is pretty average for me. Typically, I may read one or two more than that, but this is on the lower side of average, but I'm happy with this, especially considering that I was so busy in September and there's a lot of stuff going on. The way that these books are distributed, I have one that I did not rate, I have one 2-star, I have 3 3-stars, 2 3.5 stars, 2 4-stars, and 1 5-star book that I'm really excited to tell you about. I'm going to break these up into chapters, so if you want to peruse through these, you can down here. If you're watching on your phone, you can double click with 2 fingers and it'll take you right to the next chapter. And if you want, while you're watching, let me know what your favorite book was this month down in the comments below. As usual, I'm going to start with my lowest rated and work my way up to the highest rated book of the month. And so yeah, let's start with the one that I did not rate. You're probably thinking,
why did you not rate a book, Elizabeth? You always rate books. What is going on?
If I read a book that's nonfiction and it blows me away and I love it, I'm gonna rate it 5 stars. But if it's anything less than 5 stars, I'm just not gonna rate it because it doesn't feel right because it's nonfiction. Now, I don't want you to think that because I didn't rate this, because I didn't give this 5 stars, that I didn't enjoy this book, because I did. That is Stiff by Mary Roach. This book is just all about cadavers. All about cadavers. The information in this book spanned from ancient Egyptians and the way they bury their dead, all the way up to modern day human composting, crash tests, cosmetics. Sorry if there are some disturbances. I have 3 dogs in the room right now that I'm trying to keep quiet, and it's kind of impossible. She talks about decomposition. She talks about how close we actually are to a full body transplant and the kind of theoretical ideas involved with that, as far as like, if you were to cut off somebody's head and give them a new body, is the head the person or is the body the person? Where is the seat of the soul? Is it the head or the heart? If it's the heart, then the body's the person. If it's the head, then the head's the person. It's just ridiculous. But modern ideas, obviously, legally, when someone is brain dead, we call them dead. So modern ideas would lead us to think it is the head. They've done all kinds of experiments with, like, sadly, puppies. If you can't do animal cruelty, don't read this book, because there's a lot of experimentation with puppies and monkeys and all kinds of things in that discussion about full body transplants, which was interesting, but real messed up. I learned a lot of information from this book and I had a decent good time with it. But I do feel like the range of topics was very wide, and some things I was just more interested in hearing about than others. And so I couldn't give it 5 stars. Also, the premise of this says how funny it is and how irreverent her prose is. And it is. She's very personable. She's very, her voice is very strong in the narration, but it wasn't like, ha ha ha, slap your knee funny. I think I was expecting it to be more funny than it actually was, because there was so much just packed into there as far as information goes. I didn't find it as entertaining as I was hoping it would be. Nonetheless, if you're interested, I definitely would recommend reading it, because there's just so much information to learn about cadavers that I never would have known. So let's move on to my 2-star book. I read this for the Losers Club Readathon that I co-hosted with Ashley from Ashley's Little Library and Beth from Beth's All Booked. And this is 1922 by Stephen King. I feel like a 2-star rating is a little bit harsh for this. It's a novella. It's set in 1922, as you might have guessed. It's about this farmer, his son, and his wife. His wife inherits this chunk of land and she wants to sell it and move to the city. She's tired of being on the farm. He wants to continue farming and build this legacy for his son, and so they are at odds, and he comes up with this scheme, involves his son in it, in order to get his way. It's 132 pages. Obviously, Stephen King wrote this. I think I said that. If I didn't, it's a Stephen King book. I don't have anything specific to say that was wrong with this story. Like, I can't point out things that I did not like. But that being said, I wasn't connected to it. I think it had something to do with the time period and this kind of like slow moving action, and the fact that the protagonist is this kind of man, this farmer from 1922. I just didn't connect with it. I do think there was some good body horror in here. And a lot about rats and cows. And we had a lot of fun watching the buddy watch for the readathon. We watched this adaptation on Netflix, and that was so much fun, just like picking out all the things that I had seen from the book. And I actually ended up enjoying the movie a little bit more, but part of that is probably the experience of watching it with other people, and that just is a lot of fun. Generally, I just felt like I wasn't the demographic for this story, and it's just not something that I'm particularly interested in. So maybe 2 stars is a little bit harsh, but I didn't have fun with it, so I couldn't give it, you know, a neutral rating of 3 because I didn't like it. So yeah, we can move on from there. Let's talk about my 3-star books. I have 3 of them. The first one is The Swell by Ali Reynolds, also known as The Bay. So I was so confused when I went to go put in my review of this on Goodreads. It kept switching to The Bay, and I was like, what? This is a different book. And I even in my review, I was like,
I can't wait to read The Bay.
Before I realized this is the same book, and I think it's The Bay overseas and The Swell here, and there's 2 different covers. I don't know why they would choose different titles. It's confusing, but I'm fairly certain it's the same book. This one is marketed as Point Break meets And Then There Were None. Obviously, if you say And Then There Were None, I'm skeptical from the beginning because I hate that books are marketed this way when it doesn't carry over, when there's just like one little parallel and they're like, oh, Agatha Christie. And typically when it is compared to Agatha Christie, it's never as good, and therefore it's being hurt by insinuating that reference anyway. And that was the case in this one. People do die one by one, but not till like way farther in the book. So I was anticipating this, like people dying throughout the whole thing, and it just did not happen. But I will say Ali Reynolds, she wrote Shiver, which I really enjoyed last year. And that's why I wanted to pick this one up and why I wanted to read this. And once again, she somehow makes me invested and interested in sports. This time it is surfing. It's so obvious that she's an athlete because she brings up little terminology and inferences that you wouldn't know unless you have experienced this before. And I have never surfed before in my life, so it was kind of fun to learn about surfing, little things that I never would have thought of before. I think this should have been marketed as a surfer cult book because while it's not like a typical cult, there is like culty things going on in here in this circle of friends. Let me tell you what it's about. So we're following Kenna. She has moved to England, I think it was, away from the beach after her boyfriend died, and she had this traumatic experience, but she left her best friend behind, and her best friend is now telling her, hey, I met this guy, I'm getting married. And so Kenna decides to come back and see what's going on, because she's like, you've never mentioned this guy, like who is he, what's going on here, why are you so quick to marry him, like I don't know what's going on. And when she gets back to go see her friend, she realizes that her friend has gotten in with this group of other friends who are hardcore surfers, like hardcore. They have this secret beach that they go to and they want to protect it at all costs. So Kenna thinks something's up. It goes from there. Most of the POVs that we got for each chapter was Kenna, but when we needed to learn about a different character, we would get random chapters in different characters' perspectives that would give us more insight into their past and into their personality, which I at first was like a little bit caught off guard by that, but I did end up feeling like I learned a lot about them from those chapters. And it was a good way to kind of hide certain things by keeping it mostly from Kenna's perspective. There were a few pacing issues throughout the story, just because not a lot happens until like 50–60% throughout the book. I wish the action had come sooner. And the plot felt a little bit convoluted. I did enjoy Shiver more than this one, but I will continue to read from Ali Reynolds because I do think she's a good writer. And I like that kind of sports angle because I'm not really into that, and it makes me feel like I know more than I should. Or that I do, I suppose. My next 3-star book is Temper by Lane Fargo. I also read this for the Losers Club Readathon. I think you'll find that most of these were read during that time. Half of these books, at least, were read for the Readathon. I read They Never Learn last year. And I liked it, but I wasn't super on board as much as everybody else was. I thought there were some issues with the way it was plotted out. I thought the twist came way too early, the main twist. So the second half was a little bit disappointing for me. For this one, I felt like there were similar issues. The pacing and the plotting was a little bit off, where if it had been more focused and set up differently, it could have been more impactful, which is why I gave this one 3 stars. The premise was killer. The premise was great. It's set in the Chicago theater scene. We have a director, Malcolm, who has extreme methods, and his partner, production partner, Joanna, who has this weird relationship with Malcolm. They are not together, but they live together, and they have these kind of possessiveness over each other, at least Joanna does. And when Malcolm hires Kira as the lead role for this play Temper, Joanna and Kira kind of butt heads a little bit. This is said to be about female ambition and what happens when fake violence draws real blood. And I liked the writing. I like Lane Fargo's writing, but I did have some issues with the structure. There was a subplot that kind of veered away from what was actually going on, and I thought this was going to come back around and connect, but it never did. I think I know what she was trying to say, but it just did not come off in a way that was effective or convincing. She could have taken it there more, and it was never tied into the story in a meaningful way. So that was disappointing. I was waiting for some kind of twist to bring it all in, bring it around, and pull it back in together, but it just didn't happen. Although the ending was very dramatic, I wouldn't say it was a twist or a reveal. It was just a dramatic ending, and I was just left a little bit disappointed. So let's move on to my next 3-star book, and that is Lakewood by Megan Giddings. I was really excited for this one. I've been hearing about this for a long time. It's got a lot of social commentary, and I think what it was trying to do was dead on. Again, loved this premise. I just felt like there was some issues getting to the point here. I will say though that this is Megan Giddings' debut novel, and I'm currently reading her newest novel and really enjoying it. So we are not giving up on Megan Giddings, and this is not a bad book. But let me just tell you a few of my critiques that I have for it. We're following Lena, and her grandmother has just passed away. Her mother's been sick for basically her entire life, and she's now realizing how much debt her family is in, and she really wants to help them. And so she feels like she is in a position where she doesn't have much choice but to sign up for these experiments. It's the secret program. She's not supposed to tell anybody about it. No one in her friends, none of her family, nobody. And they're going to pay her an exorbitant amount of money, which is going to help her get out of debt, help her mom, help her get back on her feet. I felt like the execution was a little bit lacking. It was kind of meandering. It wasn't really focused on just race and class. There were a lot of other things mixed in, and there were moments where it was meant to like bring this like creep factor, but that in this real life setting was never really explained. Also, what was never really explained is what they were experimenting for. What were they trying to find? I did love that this was set in Michigan, and also her newest novel is set in Michigan, so I'm now convinced that Megan Giddings is from Michigan, which I am as well, so we are fellow Michiganders, so I have so much respect for her, and I love like a social horror. I do just feel like parts of this didn't come together. There were plot things that felt like they were thrown in just to create a certain mood, but didn't necessarily connect in the end. And so it felt a little bit scatterbrained. It felt like it was a little bit all over the place. I still think the commentary in here is definitely worth reading because it has a lot to say about race and class and about how your socioeconomic status and your skin color can leave you in a place, not even leave you, but start you in a place that makes it almost impossible to live a happy life, that makes you put yourself in a situation that can be dangerous just to get to the same starting point as someone like me, for example. So messed up. There's also discussion in here about, like I said, medical experimentation. Black people and people of color have been experimented on in the past without their consent, which is a real thing that actually happened. And today there are effects of those things from our past that they're still dealing with on a daily basis. If a Black person or a person of color is hospitalized, they are automatically assumed to have a higher pain threshold and that they are exaggerating whatever they are feeling for ulterior motives, things like getting meds. So this is really important to talk about, and I think it's great that Megan Giddings goes there and talks about these things and puts it out in the open. I just don't think this was the best way to do it. I still want to see this trope done in a different way, this trope of experimentation. Yeah, 3 stars. Let's not linger. 3 stars. Okay, let's move on to my 3.5-star books. I have 2 of them. The first one is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. I finally read an Ottessa Moshfegh book. Yes, I did. I have been meaning to read one of her books for a long time. I figured this one was a good place to start. Was this an interesting perspective to read from? Yes. Was there plot? No, not really. And I don't necessarily need a plot. I don't need the twists and the turns and like a plot heavy story, but if it's gonna be voice heavy, then I really need to fall in love with that voice. And I just didn't connect to her in the way that I think a lot of other people did when reading this book for some reason. Like, I wanted this to be a 5-star book. I really thought it was going to be. It just wasn't. And that's not to say it was a bad book. I just didn't connect with it in that way. Now, what I will say is that I do like her writing a lot. I think the way Ottessa Moshfegh writes is the way that most people think, and the way that I think for sure, but that most people are afraid to admit they think that way. She definitely shows this dark side of reality that is obvious, but we kind of have our blinders on to it normally in everyday life. The concept of this overly privileged, beautiful, Angelina Jolie-esque woman who just cannot handle life anymore and needs to take a year off to sleep by taking all of these pills that are prescribed to her is interesting and unique and original. Denver, get down. You're distracting. However, I just did not connect with it like most people did. And I think it's a good book. I think it's well written. I just wanted more from our protagonist. I didn't have a bad time with it, but it didn't blow me away either. My next 3.5-star book is The Best of Friends by Lucinda Berry. I'm so happy to be getting through Lucinda Berry's backlist because I really do love her writing as an author, and I think I automatically put her on a higher shelf than like anybody else. Not anybody else, but a lot of other authors. I have high expectations for her just because I do love her writing so much. And so this one wasn't my favorite of hers, but I still had a good time with it. We're essentially following these 3 different women who grew up together. This is a psychological thriller to its core. These 3 women were best friends growing up. They also all had sons at the same time who are now teenagers and best friends. An incident happens where one of the boys is killed, one is left in critical condition, and the other one is just not speaking. He's in kind of a fugue state. So for this entire book, we're trying to figure out what the hell happened. Meanwhile, each of these 3 women also have other children, also have husbands. So when we start the book out, it's really confusing. There are a lot of characters. Their perspectives alternate each chapter between these 3 women. And so the whole time you're trying to remember, okay, which one is her son? Who is her husband? And what's her situation? And so I eventually had to make a character chart. And once I did that and I could go back and reference it, it was so much more enjoyable. But there's 13 characters that we get introduced to pretty much off the bat. And so it's a little bit confusing. But that aside, I think it was well written. The chapters are short, the action is high. The twist was a little bit weak, it was a little bit unrealistic. There's also like this one of those last sentence twists where you're like, oh, which took me actually a minute to figure out, but once I did, I was like, okay, that was clever, that was fun. I will read anything Lucinda Berry writes. Literally anything she writes, I'll read it. This isn't my favorite of hers, but I still recommend it. It's still better than others in the genre. Let's move on to my 4-star reads. The first one is Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. I read this for the Book Troop book club with Gabby from Gabby Reads, and we did a live show on her channel. Unfortunately, she did not love it as much as I did. But again, Jennifer Hillier is another one of those authors that I just love her writing. I feel like she always is gritty, she always is truthful, and she does a good job of exploring characters' personalities. Oh my god, dogs! This is another thriller. We're following Paris Peralta, who in the opening scene is being arrested for her husband's murder. She is found standing over his dead body in the bathroom with a razor in her hand. She is worried about being convicted of this crime, but she's more worried about something in her past coming to light. So we're following Paris in one point of view, and then in a separate point of view, we're following Ruby Reyes, who is just being released from jail. She knows this secret about Paris's past, and she is threatening to expose her. But she was also in jail for a murder that was very similar that happened many years ago. So what I liked about this is that these character connections, the relationships in here, I felt like went there. There was some discussion about generational trauma and things of that nature. Honestly, like, I don't remember the exact details. I finished this on September 1st, so it's been a month now. But I'm going to direct you to that live show with Gabby, and I will link that down below if you're interested in checking out our full conversation about it, if you've read it and you didn't make it to the live show, because it was a good talk. It was a good time. So let's move on to my next 4-star book, and that is The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. Kim Legit.
Oh, hi, thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
I've been hearing things about this for a long time. It's YA, so I haven't really been so interested in checking it out, but I was craving like a dystopian type novel, and this scratched that itch. This I would compare to The Hunger Games or Divergent, but add an element of social commentary about women. This is set in a world that's similar to ours, except for the fact that when women or girls turn 16, they have to go leave for a year. This is called the grace year. And in this year, and in this world, women have magical powers. Their feminine allures, their feminine wiles can entrap people. Just mess with the heads of men, because how can they be expected
to have any control over their urges by themselves?
So of course it's the women's fault.
Of course it's their fault.
And so they're sent away for a year to use all of their magic up so that when they come back, they are renewed, refreshed, purified, and ready for marriage. We're following Tierney, who's your typical not like other girls. She won't buy into this concept. No one ever talks about the grace year. It's like this thing that you're just not supposed to talk about. What happens in the grace year stays in the grace year, and you're not supposed to say anything. And there's all these ceremonies around marriages before the women leave. The guys like bid on them and shit. It's
messed up.
There was a little bit of insta love that happened in this, which, you know, was a little bit much, but at the same time, I still had a really good time with this. I loved the social commentary in here. This also goes into how we are reinforced to treat each other as women as enemies. And if we would just lift each other up, we could make so much more progress. But the way society is set up in this society as well as our own, it has become a competition. In the grace year, it's a competition in the literal sense. Yeah, I thought it was really well executed. I had a good time with it. Obviously, it's YA, so I have to give it a little bit of grace for that. But overall, yeah, great book. Definitely recommend reading it if you haven't already. All right, let's talk about my 5-star book of September, which I'm super excited for. And that is The First Day of Spring by Nancy Tucker. I finally read this book. I've been hearing so many people talk about this book. Not even so many people talk about this book, but like it's been recommended to me several times, especially since I did my Creepy Child video, which I'll link up above and down below if you're interested in watching that. This one would have fit right into that video. We're following Chrissy, who is 8 years old, and at the start of this novel, she has just murdered a little boy. So there's two timelines. We're following her as an 8-year-old, and then we're following her again as an adult, where she has a child of her own, a little girl of her own, Molly. And she doesn't understand how to be a mom. She's trying, but she's having to face all of these things from her past, and it very much kind of humanizes this murderer, which you think that sounds really bad, but it does leave some room for nuance here, which is really interesting. The writing was so freaking good. I loved the writing. She has a way with words that I look for, that I would compare to Gillian Flynn. It's not overly flowery, but her specific choices of metaphor, of simile, are so distinct and so purposeful, and it gives you a very clear, vivid picture of what she's trying to say, and I loved that. It's about so much more than just this killer child. It's about relationships and people and the evolution of the mind. It doesn't explicitly state it, but in my opinion, this book has a very strong opinion about the whole nature versus nurture debate, which I found really interesting as well. In 8-year-old Chrissy's perspective, we're learning about the action. We're learning about her motives, what she's feeling during the time, what's making her want to behave the way that she's behaving. And then when we're getting the older version of her perspective, we are learning about the consequences of those actions and what happened in her life to lead her to where she is now. 8-year-old Chrissy's character was so well done. You really believe that this is the perspective of a child, because there are things, inferences happening around her when the adults are talking and such that she just doesn't pick up on, and you as the reader pick up on, obviously, but she doesn't get it. She's very misguided in her beliefs as an 8-year-old as well, which also affects the way that she behaves. And she had a terrible upbringing, a terrible relationship with her mother. So at some point you do start to identify with her a little bit and feel bad for her, even though she is this killer, especially when it's compared to her as an adult and the struggles that she's going through. There are instances as an adult where she is trying to connect with people, but she just doesn't feel connection with people. She doesn't have that innate empathy that most people have. And there's one instance where her daughter is walking along this wall and she falls off, and this other mother comes up to her and starts comforting her, and she's like, oh damn, why didn't I think of that? Like, I didn't think to comfort her. And then the mother whispers something into the little girl's ear, something probably comforting, and she is upset because she can't hear it and therefore she can't copy it. So she's so used to copying human behavior. And there's so many things that just make sense, that just work with this character and her personality, that felt so true to real life that they could be real. She feels like a fully fleshed out character. The ending was fantastic. It ended on this really hopeful note, which I was fully not expecting for this kind of book. And like I said, the writing was incredible. As an example, I'll read a couple of lines. One that I liked was, Linda slid down the wall like a piece of scrambled egg sliding down a plate. Like, you can just see exactly how she would fall down a wall like that. In my head, it always sounded shiny, but out loud, it sounded dull. Getting a visual image of a sound. Like, I love that. I love that writing. Anyway, I could not recommend this more. I am obsessed with it. I love it. 5 stars. Going on the list for contenders for the year, for sure. I've had so many new amazing books that I've read this year, and I'm just so excited about that. I can't wait to try to figure out which one's the best at the end of the year. It's going to be a good time. And that's it. Those are the 10 books that I read in September. If you're still here, thank you so much. As always, I appreciate you. Truly, truly appreciate you. Again, let me know down below in the comments what your favorite book that you read this month was. I'm always open to recommendations. As I always say, please let me know if you look at this list of books and you're like, you know what, she would like this book. Tell me. I want to know. There are certainly books that I haven't heard of, though I've heard of many of them. There are certainly ones that I have not heard of, and I'm counting on you guys to help me out in that sector. And that's it for today. Don't forget that life is short. So read Riley. Cheers. And goodbye.